All right. Hello. Thank you for watching this presentation. My research is focused on answering the broad question, how do empires provision the materials necessary for creating and maintaining control of their subjects? This question is rooted in the ideas that first, elites create and maintain power through controlling communication. Second, this communication can occur through symbols or symbolic objects. And third, that elites deploy these objects in specific contexts like feasts, rituals, and ceremonies to convey messages about their power. Specifically within this question, I am examining how the Inca Empire organized the production of Inca polychrome pottery at the site of Pachacamac. Inca polychrome pottery is a distinct, standardized type of pottery with geometric designs and really set forms found throughout the empire, and it was produced at multiple places by subject potters working for the state as part of their mandatory labor obligation. Pachacamac is a major archaeological site about 30 kilometers south of Lima that was the political capital of the Ichma polity and the home of an important oracle. After the Inca conquered the site, they constructed many state structures and spaces or places, including the Temple of the Sun. It has also been the subject of over a century of archaeological investigation, and many artifacts from the site are currently housed in museums in the United States, which form the basis of my sample. To understand the organization of production for this pottery, I want to examine its chanapatoire, or production sequence. Following a communities of practice approach, once an artisan learns the techniques for making pottery, the decorative styles of pottery that this artisan makes may change, but the process used to make the pottery follows these learned techniques. Because Inca polychrome pottery was made by a diversity of producers across the empire working in different places with different materials, boundaries between these groups of producers can be reconstructed by examining the techniques used to make this pottery. By reconstructing these boundaries, the organization of production for this pottery can be understood. My research combines traditional ceramic analyses with archaeometric techniques to investigate all steps of the production process, from raw material acquisition and processing, forming and construction, surface treatment and decoration, and firing. Okay, so beginning with raw material acquisition and processing, I'm using a technique called neutron activation analysis to determine chemical compositional differences in the elemental chemistry of the pottery. Differences in these elements can be indicative of differences in location of manufacture. So in my research, I found three distinct compositional groups. One of these groups contained both Inca polychrome pottery and local Ichma styles of pottery, group 1. Here's some kind of examples of each of the pottery found in each group. And then groups 2 and 3 contained exclusively Inca polychrome pottery. I also compared these data against data previously collected from other sites in the same valley, finding some similarities between them. So here's the outlines from the groups, and you can see the plotting of the different sites in the same valley. And then I also compared it to data from Cusco, the Inca capital, pottery from Cusco that had previously been tested, and found no similarities. An expansion of the study is currently ongoing. Okay. To examine forming and construction, I used X-radiography. This allowed me to look inside the whole vessels and determine the methods used to build the pottery, as well as the sequence used to do it. I examined Inca urpus or aribolos, a distinctly Inca form, used for storage and serving maize beer, chicha. And I also examined a local form called caragolletes, which are from, in the Ichma tradition, face neck jars. They're morphologically similar to aribolos, so I thought that if there were any overlap, then if the same producers were making it, they would use the same techniques. Okay, so for the face neck jar, starting with them, I found that they were made with a single mold-made piece over a positive mold for the base. Then coils were added on top of this, and then the neck piece was attached with luting, or a bit of clay added around the seam. So I'll show some examples of that. Here you can see these vertical cracks that are indicative of kind of a mold-made piece, probably laid over another piece of pottery to start for the base. And you can see they go kind of about halfway up, and they are kind of radially around. Here you can see kind of distinctly the coils added to the top. These areas that are darker are thinner. So here's one 1, 2, 3 coils added kind of, and then this whole piece here, much thicker, is the base. And then here's an example of the luting on top. You can see kind of the fingerprints and impressions. This one has a pretty restricted neck, so it's not able to be really smoothed out, but you can see kind of the boundaries of where this luting is added to join the neck to the body. Okay, so for Erpus, there were two different methods of construction that I found. In the first, two hemispheric mold-made halves were scraped for smoothness, added to a base formed in a negative mold, and handles were rolled coils attached separately at the seams. So here you can see kind of the uneven interiors for the bases suggesting negative molds. And here you can see kind of the diagonal scraping, these lines sort of highlight it for you, around the interior. Now, another set of Erpus used a different construction technique where the base and body were made together in two hemispheric halves. And then these were joined and luting was added inside. So here's some examples of this. You can see kind of the two halves and the seams of them kind of going around here. This is kind of, these cracks are kind of indicative of the seams, and then there's added clay around the entire exterior. You can sort of see here this one has good finger impressions pushing into a negative mold, these hemispheric halves. Okay. So for necks, I found that they were either attached directly to the body or a step back and then luting added to the joint. You can see these x-rays here of both of these techniques. Okay, so the results of this research indicated that there were multiple techniques used to construct the Erpus at Pachacamac, and these did not necessarily correspond to differences in decorative style. They also had some similarities to the techniques used to build Ichma Caragalletes, but there were also differences as well. Okay, so examining the surface finish and decoration, comparing those data to compositional analysis from neutron activation, I found that there was no attribute, nor metric measurement, nor decorative motif that could reliably be used to distinguish one compositional group from another. So one compositional group wasn't all 18 centimeters in diameter, the other 21. One didn't have one set of, decoration style, only two colors, the other had three. Things like this. And there was nothing that could distinguish the compositional differences. These were standardized across all three compositional groups. So in addition to this traditional attribute analysis, I also studied the composition of black and white pigments using a technique called laser ablation inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometry, or LAICPMS. In this analysis, I found a compositional similarity in black pigments from Inca pottery across all three neutron activation composition groups, and differences in the composition of black pigments from Ichma pottery from group 1. So all three Inca pottery from all three groups had the same composition that was different from pottery used, or from pigments used on local pottery. This may indicate that pigment recipe was controlled by the Inca, or local potters were being retrained to use a different method or recipe of painting when making Inca pottery. Okay, so to examine firing and also to add information about material selection and processing and forming and construction, I'm using a technique called thin section petrography. In this technique, a slice of pottery is cut down to about 30 microns thick and then viewed through plane and cross-polarizing light under a microscope. This allows for identification of minerals present in the matrix, which can help source the clay's or temper's location. Size and shape of the minerals can also inform on raw materials processing. For example, was temper added? And voids in the thin section can help identify the forming process. Lastly, optical activity in the ground mass and minerals can be indicative of firing temperature, or a range of firing temperatures. This analysis is currently ongoing. I expect to complete it soon. Initial results indicate that there were multiple sources and multiple groups of potters producing this Inca pottery, and some of it may have been imported from other Inca centers as well. This one shows similarities with some pottery from Cusco that's been published. Okay, so in conclusion, there are several points that can be taken away from this research, which will be built upon by the final parts of ongoing research. First, the organization of production of Inca polychrome pottery at Pachacamac was complex. It was made by Ichma and other potters, made locally and imported, and multiple different techniques were being used to make it. Secondly, some aspects of making Inca polychrome pottery required retraining by the state, um, such as the composition of pigments or the standardization in form and design, or the alteration of forming techniques for the urbus from Cargoyetes. I'm hoping to wrap all of this up within the next within this calendar year. So thank you very much for watching.